Nominees are Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth to lead the 3 million people of the Department of Defense. He's a combat veteran, most recently a morning show host on Fox News with no government experience. Former Congressman Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, in charge of law enforcement. Gaetz has been investigated by Republicans for alleged drug use and sex with a minor. Gaetz denies those allegations. Former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence. She sought a pardon for Edward Snowden, who leaked U.S. secrets and now lives in Russia. And Robert Kennedy Jr. for Secretary of Health and Human Services, a skeptic of vaccinations. It's up to the new Republican majority in the Senate to decide whether these nominees are equipped to represent the American.
Did you see it? Did you see it? You see how they can't focus on any one thing? Michael just said it right. Michael's like, 61 Minutes should have just said, listen, all these picks suck. We don't like them. They don't know what to do. They're like, this guy. I love the line, too, about Pete Hegseth. They said that Pete Hegseth has no government experience. Yeah, outside of working for our military in combat and getting 2 Bronze Stars. You're 100% correct, Scott. No government experience. I believe these assholes. Pete Hegseth has no government experience. What was he working for? Fucking G.I. Joe? Who'd you think he was working for in the military? That's the government, you dumbass.
Hello, everybody. Jeez, I know I played that clip before, but it's appropriate for today, and geez, it's still hilarious. Why am I out of focus? Let me see. Is it because of? Is it lighting up too high? I don't know. Maybe I don't look that weird, but Well, okay, we'll just deal with it. Anyway, yeah, it's very relevant to today because, to be honest, it was a pretty slow day, and that's why I'm really late. There was barely anything to report today except for really the aftermath of the Matt Gaetz withdrawal, and now that he's out and the Senate is no longer super worried about that particular candidate, now they've shifted attention over to Pete Hegseth, who is their next target of interest that they're going to try to smear like crazy. But we'll get into that in just a little bit. I got a couple clips, and they're both fairly long today, so I'm not going to waste too much time before we get into it. I just wanted to apologize first because it's just slow today because I couldn't really find much new information. Everything's kind of just like where things are at, and people are just getting into the gossip of things, which really sucks because I get tired of hearing gossip and just the bickering back and forth and the little slights and the little jabs back and forth. It gets annoying, and you don't hear much directly from Trump at all at this point because not only is he really working to make sure he picks people that are going to be really well suited for his cabinet, but I think he knows exactly what's happening right now, and that is that the Senate is just essentially waiting until the Republican majority takes control, and until that point, there's not much really that they're going to be able to do, other than just like attempt to, because one thing that was really particularly a problem for the Congress and as a whole before even the House turned Republican was the omnibus bills and the packages that had God knows how much stuff in it and were being voted on. Man, that still looks weird. Maybe it's too close. It might just, hang on just a second. It might just be the light. Let me see. Sorry, guys, it's just bugging me. Yeah, that was kind of it. That's fine. That's better, at least. Anyway, yeah, one thing Mike Johnson has definitely done that at least has been a step up from previous speakers is he hasn't been just willing to lay down and take it when it comes to the bills that are coming out from the Senate and even the bills that are coming out from the House. He's not going to allow the spending bills to have, funding for Ukraine, funding for this, funding for pet projects, funding for all these new government agencies, funding for old government agencies, funding for, he's not going to let all this stuff be 1,000 and 1,500 page bills that are supposed to be just about government spending. And he's said it and he's done his best to block it, although unfortunately the bills have still been very large, but at least they've been stuff that they've been able to read at least before it's time to vote on them, which was one of the most large issues that Republicans have had with the Senate for a long time. And to tie things back to today's episode, it is why Matt Gaetz really notoriously got on the bad side of pretty much everybody on Capitol Hill, because it's widely seen as his doing mainly that McCarthy was ousted. And I've been indifferent to Kevin McCarthy for a long time, and I still kind of feel indifferent towards him. I don't fall into the category of the people that think he's the worst Republican speaker ever, but I also don't don't think that he was anything to get excited about, because mainly that he was good on the issues of assigning the right people to chairman the correct committees. I think he did a good job there, but when it comes to the corruption issues around Washington spending, it was just kind of the same old. And that was pretty much why Matt Gaetz was the one to kind of step up and cry for the not cry, but to what's the word for it? To make a motion to vacate the speakership. And of course, because Republican infighting is terrible, that meant that we had those weeks where there was no speaker. But I will say this: the fact that Hakeem Jeffries and every Democrat will go out and act like, look at how long they're taking to pick a speaker, and yeah, we know you guys have a hive mind and you get told what to do by your superiors, and so there's no question about what to do. We all know that. We don't need to hear how terrible it is when people, actually debate things once in a while. That's actually kind of nice, so shut the hell up. But unfortunately, that did end up with, I was excited for a while when it looked like Jim Jordan might be House Speaker, but at the same time, I'm also kind of against that idea, because I think Jim Jordan is at his best as a chairman, which he would not be able to be a chairman and the House Speaker, because it just wouldn't work. But at the same time, I think he does his best when he's got his there's the joke, like the meme of Jim Jordan rolling his sleeves up whenever he's speaking to a witness that he really can't get anything out of, and when he does that, it's business time. But anyway, yeah, it's for Matt Gaetz, it was always going to be an uphill battle, and I think, as I said on the last episode, I think this may have been a kind of ploy to begin with. This was something that I've heard a couple people mention, that because Matt Gaetz was such a controversial figure on Capitol Hill, and because especially when it comes to the senators, and especially even when it comes to Republican senators, he was going to have a hard time with anyone except for the Mike Lees, the John Kennedys, the real, actual conservatives. He was going to have a hard time, especially with the McConnell loyalists, because they have definitely put their, they're not going to They're not going to back somebody like Matt Gaetz. And with Pam Bondi, you'll see somebody that's equally loyal, but not have the baggage. But the problem is, I don't see. I still like Pam Bondi, as I said yesterday. I still like her as being DOJ head of DOJ, but I don't. I still have this strong feeling that they really needed that. Same way that Trump was needed as president, we needed somebody at DOJ that was going to be the bull in the china shop and really just kind of tear the place down. And I hope that Pam Bondi comes, kind of close to that. She is part of the Florida, Florida conservative revolution that was going on when Rick Scott, and then followed by, of course, Ron DeSantis as responsible for turning Florida into the sort of Republican stronghold that it is now. But I don't see her as being as willing to. Now, she's going to call out the areas where she sees them, but Matt Gaetz has been dealing with, and I was trying to find this clip. I couldn't find it, but I was trying to find this clip of him when Christopher Wray was answering questions at one point, and it was during the time when they were really digging into the Hunter Biden laptop, and he reads the quote that came from Hunter Biden's text message to I can't remember the guy's name, the Chinese contact that was supposed to be paying them it's like $4 million or something that was coming in, and it was the "I'm sitting next to my father" text message, and interestingly, and of course, he throws out, "Sounds like a shakedown, doesn't it, director?" And it is a shakedown. So we know what Matt Gaetz would do if he was in charge of the FBI, but hopefully we'll see something similar. But this is the point that I'm getting at today, is that, and by the way, when it comes to the McConnell loyalists and the new leader of the Senate, John Thune, who I've said before I don't know that much about, but if he's loyal to McConnell, I kind of know what's going to happen. I did catch a clip yesterday, and I think this was recent. Another freeze-up section in front of the press and in front of people asking questions, where McConnell is just answering questions and then just stands there, does nothing for like good 30 seconds, 45 seconds before one of the people has to grab him by the wrist and say, "Senator, is there anything else you wanted to comment on?" And it's not long before him and or her and John Thune are both leading him away, and it's like, yeah, that guy's sticking around, great, awesome. He's not the leader anymore, but I don't know if that guy should be even anywhere near the legislative body. But anyway, it's just embarrassing. And on top of that, it's like, what are you doing? What is this? And we also know, and this is another thing, I'm sure, major reason why this is a point of making sure Matt Gaetz would not be confirmed, is that we all know he's spoken very publicly about how there need to be term limits for senators, and so to the people who have been there for, I don't know, since the Jurassic period, I don't think it's going to be going over well with people that have made a career out of staying in Washington for their entire lives. But this is the pattern that we see, and this is like when I heard about this clip being discussed, I heard somebody talking about it, and I had to look it up, and I found it. Glen Greenwald, who is, he's still a pretty left guy, but he was always on Tucker. He's his show System Update on Rumble is got a lot of people that watch, and he's definitely not at all in line with the modern left in any way. He pretty much despises the modern left, and And he's not a big fan of the modern right either, but he at least recognizes Trump and the MAGA movement as something that is a truly populist sort of change that is very much needed for America's leaders to kind of embrace, as opposed to the same old neocon warmongering bullshit that we get used to from our leaders. But so he's been very vocal about more or less supporting Trump and his presidency, and has been happy, especially with, of course, RFK Jr. being assigned a position in the Health and Human Services Department, and so that, and everybody, even I was talking to a family member yesterday who doesn't like Trump, but is still happy that RFK Jr. is going to be a part of the cabinet, and I think that's one of the things that really brings a lot of people together that would normally be very apprehensive against the idea of Trump being president, and so just the fact that there's so many diverse people and true diverse, not Democrat diversity, but actual diversity in the cabinet. But he was discussing with another guy that was well aware of the corruption at the high levels of the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the lobbyists that essentially are the ones that and essentially anybody that really is part of the donor class, has a lot of money, and constantly is talking to senators. He discussed with Glenn that this sort of playbook that they were using against Matt Gaetz of the sex scandal. It's something we've seen before, and everybody's been pointing out the similarities with Brett Kavenaugh. That's the most recent example of the same thing, and because that was basically exactly what they did. I actually wasn't watching that hearing, but I did see a number of clips from the hearing that I was like, my God, this is despicable. What the hell's going on here? And so that's not the way that you go through a Supreme Court justice confirmation. That was the most, the way they treated him was just completely uncalled for. And of course, lo and behold, one of the people leading the charge was Kamala Harris, who was still a senator at the time. That was wonderful to see. But the unfortunate thing is that this is just a commonplace a way to smear somebody who they really don't want to see confirmed, and they will go to this tactic almost every time and at least use it early on, if not the first attempt to take somebody out that they don't like. The nefarious sex scandal tactic. So, because we talked yesterday about a little bit about the allegations against Matt Gaetz and how they really don't make any sense. And so one point that I heard yesterday, it's not brought up in this clip, but one point that I heard yesterday was that there's this woman who is supposed to be a corroborating witness who saw the supposed sexual act with Matt Gaetz and this 17-year-old girl, and his question was, so wait a minute, this was 7 years ago, and she waited 7 years to talk about witnessing a sexual encounter between Matt Gaetz and a minor, and it just happened to be the time when he's nominated to Attorney General under Donald Trump that she comes forward to corroborate this witness. Yeah, sure, okay, I'm sure that's the case. But this guy that he's talking to is mentioning how commonplace the honeypot sort of tactic is used, and there's a book that he references by somebody who, ironically, a lot of the people that it's used on seem to come from Florida, and yeah. So anyway, I was going to play that clip right now, and we'll go over it. It's kind of a longer clip, so it'll take a minute, but I'll kind of pause along the way, and we'll kind of discuss what's going on. So let me get this loaded, and we'll start. Going on, because like I said, these I got 2 clips that I definitely want to go through today, and both of them are kind of long, so it'll take a while to go through them. But I don't want to just play them straight through. I wanted to kind of give my thoughts on it as we're going along. So hold on just a second. Why didn't I get this folder open? Oh wait, maybe I did. Yeah, I did. Hey, here we go. Okay. And okay, here we go. Oh wait, it's in downloads, isn't it? That's right. I didn't change anything, so here we go. All right. So yeah, this is from Glen Greenwald's show System Update on Rumble, and by the way, if you're not subscribed, go check out Glen Greenwald's show. It's pretty good. And as I said, I'm not even like a giant Glen Greenwald fan or anything, but when he's right, he's right. And this is one of those instances where he's definitely right. So let's bring this up. All right. All right. Oh, I see what's going on here. Come on. There we go. All right. Let's get rolling.
Let me just switch gears for a second and ask you just a little bit about Matt Gaetz, even though he is no longer the nominee to run the Justice Department because he has withdrawn. You wrote an article not about Matt Gaetz so much as, although it was about Matt Gaetz as well, but also more so about what you called the DC lobby and how intent they were on preventing Matt Gaetz from becoming Attorney General, and how they were kind of coming for him to destroy him, to prevent his nomination. I think the title of that article from September was, or last month, yeah, it was "The DC Lobby Comes for it." Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm sorry. It's from late 2023, after he sabotaged Kevin McCarthy and forced Kevin McCarthy out. But so it was the DC lobby is coming for Matt Gaetz. So this was not part of the nomination, but it was just sort of this lingering, widespread hatred for him and this attempt to destroy him. What did you mean by the DC lobby coming for Matt Gaetz, and why were they doing that?
Well, look, it's very well known that he's hated by some of his colleagues.
Right.
And, the kind of tabloid beltway press like to play up the kind of little petty insults that happen on Capitol Hill, the little subtweets that happen on social media. That part's not particularly interesting to me. What's interesting to me is that Matt Gaetz was the first House Republican and one of the only House Republicans to jump on the kind of Bernie Sanders coded movement of getting rid of PAC donations, saying no to lobbyist donations, no to leadership PAC donations, no to any of the kind of corporate money that sloshes around DC that funds both parties. He's rebuked his party on many key votes, fighting leadership on arms to Yemen, on, he led the opposition earlier this year among Republicans on voting against the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, encoding the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which essentially outlaws discourages certain criticism of Israel. He's fought with House progressives on non-compete agreements.
That's actually important, real quick, by the way, because one thing I felt really shaky about that bill myself. That was the Anti-Semitism Awareness Bill, or whatever the hell it was called. Essentially, it was at the height of the campus protests, and they were trying to pass this bill that was meant to kind of, like, once again, it was a messaging bill. It wasn't really anything that was really legally enforceable, but it was still really just kind of pointless because, and the worst part about it was that the bill didn't define anti-Semitism. It used the definition provided by can't remember the name of the group, but they're like the group that is most actively involved in making sure there's awareness about the Holocaust and the genocidal dictators that have attempted to kill entire populations of Jewish people, et cetera, et cetera. So it was just a bill that was against the protest, but because they were using this definition that was provided by Anti-Semitism Defense League, I think is what it's called, ASDL, or ASDL, I think is what it's called. But yeah, they're and it's such a broad definition. Like if it's not just like it's not just anti-Semitism. It's like the main problem is that it correlates Israel with Jewish people, and kind of intermixes the two, interchanges the two, so that the word Jew and the word Israel are both like interchangeable. So, and I don't think that, as much as I am pro-Israel in their stance against the sort of terrorist attack and Palestinian aggression from, not Palestinian, but essentially mostly we're talking about Hamas and Hezbollah and those groups. As much as I am, completely anti-terrorist group, and a little bit more so than maybe most people, I also recognize that it's obvious that criticizing Israel is not something that is anti-Semitic in and of itself, even though that is, yes, somewhere that traditionally has been the home of Jewish people. That doesn't mean that their political influence or that their home nation is always going to be perfectly in line with Jewish interests and what is best for Jewish people in general. And so I don't think it's fair to link any criticism of Israel as being anti-Semitic. So that was where I stood, and that's where I really didn't like the way they wrote the bill. So anyway, I just wanted to put that context in there. So let's and Matt Gaetz obviously was not for that bill. So yeah, here we go.
Antitrust, on breaking up the big tech monopolies, on vote after vote on corporate copyright law, and on many kind of very esoteric issues that have to do with worker power and corporate power and anti-competitive policy. He's broken with the swamp, with the DC political leadership of the Republican Party, and that's upset a lot of the kind of established powers to be. So, that was kind of laid out in this piece from last year when he led the revolt against Kevin McCarthy, but it's just as true today, where you see a lot of the folks who are, tweeting out and promoting anti-Matt Gaetz stories, promoting kind of, sexual allegations against Matt Gaetz. If you actually looked at their bios, who are these people? Several of them were working for the tech lobby, people who work at groups funded by Google. Matt Gaetz has really led the effort to encourage the continued prosecution of Google under antitrust law. He's praised what the Biden administration has done, kind of picking up the torch from what the Trump administration had started 4 years ago. And that has made him a very hated man in Washington. He walks around with a mark on his back, with a target on his back.
Yeah, and he said, I love Lena Khan, but also, he also has that same profile when it comes to foreign policy. He was adamant about the need to leave Afghanistan, to cancel authorizations to use military force. I saw him at war with Liz Cheney on several occasions in the House over exactly these kinds of issues, but also with pro-war Democrats. He has a lot of heterodox views that are very counter to the swamp's dogma and ideology. And so certainly at least part of the hatred toward him is motivated by exactly that, which is part of the reason why I thought that choice could have been so good in terms of its outcome. But I want to just talk about the sex scandal thing for a second. And it's still, a lot of the details are still emerging. We don't have the report yet that the Health Ethics Committee prepared that's supposedly very damaging. But one thing I do know for sure is that sex scandals are often the way that Washington tries to destroy the people they want to destroy for totally separate reasons. I talked on Tucker Carlson's show about how the response to Daniel Ellsberg leaking the Pentagon Papers was to break into his psychoanalyst office to precisely in order to discover his psychosexual secrets and leak them and use them to destroy his reputation. It happened with Julian Assange. At the moment he became genuinely threatening, out of nowhere, two women came forward and said we had consensual sex, but I didn't consent to him not using a condom, and that became rape under Swedish law, which drove him into the embassy. Obviously, it was used against Bill Clinton, and now it's being used against Pete Hegseth. And of course, this is the thing that has been used to destroy Matt Gaetz. There's a lot of murkiness on this issue, on the whole sex scandal issue. And as I said, I don't want to ask you to delve deeply or comment on it in detail because there's still a lot known. But is it your sense that had Matt Gaetz been different than what he is, had he been a swamp creature, had he been somebody who just sort of went along, that there would have been a lot less interest in this sex scandal than there was when it was needed to prevent him from taking over the Justice Department?
Well, of course, and actually, speaking of Pete Hegseth, I mean, much more damaging, much more serious allegations against Pete Hegseth. But I would say, I don't know, I haven't run the numbers, but maybe 100 to 1 in terms of media coverage on Matt Gaetz. And I think part of that comes down to power and who Matt Gaetz has pissed off over the years, the established interest groups that he threatens with his kind of policy platform. I think that kind of reflects that reality. And I would go even.
Not to mention that Matt Gaetz is a member of the House of Representatives, whereas Pete Hegseth, is part of Fox News, is just usually their morning show. But sometimes fills in for some of the late night hosts. So, yeah, not exactly the same level of influence, but still about 100 to 1. I'd say that's probably pretty accurate. But it just goes to show you what Washington wants, they will fight vigorously to get. So anyway, let's go.
Further back than the list that you mentioned, I mentioned Ralph Nader earlier, when he came out with his book, Unsafe at Any Speed, looking at kind of the known design problems in the automobile industry that were killing people. General Motors had kind of worked with trying to frame him with a sex worker or something of that nature. And so, this is a tried and true playbook from the corporate and kind of political elite to use this kind of sexual allegation, sexual innuendo to destroy their political enemies. And you're right, we don't know all the facts here, but the facts that are available here in the Matt Gaetz issue do not justify the rhetoric that you see in the political and media sphere. I mean, if you log in to Twitter or X or Blue Sky or any of these platforms and you see any mention of Matt Gaetz, people claim that he is a rapist, a pedophile, that he paid for child sex, really that he's a sex criminal. None of, from the facts we know, none of that is justified whatsoever. There's this kind of trial by media, you're guilty until proven innocent dynamic that I find very unbecoming and kind of disgusting, actually. And you can't kind of engage in any policy-oriented debate, political dynamic when this is what's overshadowing the entire discourse. Any kind of article I post about Matt Gaetz, I wrote another piece about him last week, just looking at some of his heterodox votes and his kind of more worker, small business aligned, pro-consumer policy agenda, which is very unusual for a House Republican member. And you look at thousands of responses to this article, and this person is a child rapist, he's a pedophile. I mean, it's just incredibly toxic and dishonest.
And there's so many more examples. Like obviously,
by the way, just to go over this one more time because I talked about this yesterday, but to make sure that we go back over this, the allegations for what they were on their face, just to go back, was that he had sex with someone who was 17, claims he didn't know that the girl was 17, and as soon as he found out she was 17, broke off the relationship and then supposedly re-engaged the relationship again after she was 18 or something, which he was in New York at the time, where the age of consent is 17, and he lives in Florida where the age of consent is 18, but he wasn't there when the sexual encounter happened, blah, 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 blah. it's all really ridiculously confusing and stupid and pointless in the first place because, okay, like, you don't morally agree with his decisions to sleep with someone that young. Okay, well, regardless of whether it's true or not, the word pedophile does not exactly describe this correctly, and for people to get that crazy overblown about it is just absolutely ridiculous, especially considering the fact that, like I said earlier, somebody who was a key witness to this was somebody that supposedly saw it happening and didn't mention it because it came up 7 years ago or something, and she didn't mention it for 7 straight years until he was nominated for Attorney General, and lo and behold, now we got to bring the allegations out. But and I think they're about to bring up the same point, but the what was the I think I forgot what I was going to say. No. Anyway, we'll just keep. I just wanted to go back over that because it's just so, like, for the rhetoric that I've heard as well that gets so crazy. Kevin McCarthy, same thing. When I heard him interviewed on Fox, went as far as to say he was the head of some pedophile sex ring that was. It's like, come on, my God, this is getting way out of hand. But that's the point. And that's the point, is for the actual allegations to get more and more and more and more extreme as you play the telephone game of bringing it, just bringing it up a notch, and then next thing you know, he's probably a member of the cartels next. So who knows? But anyway, let's go back with this. Oops.
So that was done with Brett Kavenaugh, and out of the blue appeared like decades-old allegations. I don't know if you remember this, but in Massachusetts,
Alex Morris and Richard Neal.
For people, just to remind people that Richard Neal is even though most people don't know his name, is an extremely powerful member of Congress. He was the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, which controls essentially the budget. And when this young gay mayor of a town in Massachusetts decided to run against him in the primary to primary Richard Neal, out of nowhere came this scandal that when he was 28, 29, 30 years old, he was talking to 21, 22-year-old gay men on Grindr, that he actually had gone out with them. And the same rhetoric was deployed against him, that he was a pedophile, that he was some sort of sex pest, even though all of them were above the age of consent. And then it turned out that that scandal was, and all these left-wing groups ran away and canceled their endorsement of him. And it turned out that that scandal was manufactured by a bunch of slimy Democratic Party operatives who wanted a job with Richie Neal and who went to Amherst College and who helped invent that, knowing that that's the way to destroy people's reputation. And I have to say two things, which is, I just want to get your reaction. One is that in the Matt Gaetz case, it's actually even worse than a lot of the other cases, because here the Justice Department aggressively and actively investigated Matt Gaetz to determine whether or not there was any evidence that he committed crimes. And it wasn't the Trump DOJ that did it, it was the Biden DOJ. Mm-hmm. And obviously they were eager to get Matt Gaetz. They leaked constantly to try and destroy his reputation, but at the end of the day, they closed the case on the grounds that there was no evidence available to prove that he was guilty of any crime, and yet this doesn't matter at all. It's not even just that the government never proved his case, it's that the government actively investigated and themselves said there's no evidence that he committed a crime. And then the other aspect that I think the reason why these weapons are so effective is because once somebody is accused of that, like Julian Assange gets accused of rape, or Alex Morris gets accused of, I don't know, somehow like pedophilia or being a sex pest because he was like dating 22-year-old gay men. Obviously in the case of Matt Gaetz, and I've defended Matt Gaetz, I've just on due process ground, I've defended Alex Morris based on the ground of nothing. You know what happens to you when you stick your head up and defend any of these people, which is you then get kind of smeared by the same tactic, like, oh, he must be defending Matt Gaetz because he's a pedophile, and Richie and Alex Morris or Julian Assange because he's a sex pest. And it's a huge incentive for people to just kind of run away and not have anybody defending them, so that just the accusations themselves are enough to destroy the person without any due process or evidence required.
No, that's right. I haven't written anything publicly about the Matt Gaetz sexual allegations, and yet when I post a tweet or my story about, narrowly about Matt Gaetz's policy positions, his political positions, his beliefs around privacy or political power or business, I get swarmed with people claiming that I'm in support of sex crimes or I support pedophilia. It's a chilling dynamic. I think, I don't mind it. I've gone through the ringer a few times, but I think for most reporters, they see this dynamic, they don't think it's worth it, so they don't say anything. They keep quiet and they actively engage in this smear campaign. And for the Richard Neal case, this just for your listeners, one additional context. Democrats have talked for 30 years now about closing the loopholes that hedge fund managers and private equity bosses exploit. So they pay a lower tax rate than their secretaries. It's something that Obama talked about a lot and many other Democratic politicians. One of the big reasons that never actually changes, even under Democratic control, is that people like Richard Neal, who is the top Democrat on the tax writing committee, is very cozy with big business and with those major donors. So, this effort to primary him from a more progressive candidate from Alex Morris completely concocted fake allegation of a sex crime, of, grooming people or whatever. I mean, it was a honeypot thing where operatives were lying to him and manipulating these kind of like attempts at dates. And just to look at the reaction that so many left-wing and Democratic groups, after this, I think, very obviously fake allegation came out, they ran for the hills. They abandoned this effort to challenge Richie Neal. So, this is the part of the process of how the establishment stays in power. You wonder, why does the tax code never change, or perhaps why the ingredients in cereal never change when it comes to RFK or something else? It's the same kind of smear cycle. And again, not just just to pick up one other thread that you mentioned, it's not just that the DOJ aggressively investigated this and had many FBI agents, had the FBI agents even paying for the therapy of some of the women who were involved. You see so much other evidence. I encourage anyone who's curious about this Gaetz dynamic. Yes, we don't know all the facts publicly yet, but Chris Dorworth, a Florida lobbyist, was allegedly shaken down by a criminal in Florida, someone who introduced Gaetz allegedly to some of these women as this criminal, Joel Greenberg, I believe is his name. He was a local tax collector in Florida. He was using taxpayer money on crypto scams and pyramid schemes. He was using taxpayer money to pay prostitutes. He was abusing his office. He controlled the government office that creates IDs, and he was creating fake IDs for himself and for other people. I mean,
including ones to make underage girls who were 17 look like they were above the age of consent.
That's exactly right. And so this guy, Joel Greenberg, after he's caught for his criminal enterprise, he attempts to basically shake down powerful Florida politicians and obtain a pardon from Donald Trump. And part of that effort included Chris Dorworth and Matt Gaetz and others who he believed to be close to Donald Trump. And there's a lot of text messages and evidence that there was a very elaborate scheme from Greenberg's family, which was very wealthy, and from Greenberg himself, to basically coerce and smear folks who would not join this scheme. He created fake social media profiles to claim that other people were pedophiles. He attempted to honeypot folks to essentially extort people to obtain this pardon from Donald Trump, and he didn't get it. Read the lawsuit from Chris Dorworth. Look at all the evidence. Again, not all the facts are known yet, but from the few facts that we do know, nothing has really justified the smear campaign that we've seen in the last 2 weeks.
So that was the guy we talked about yesterday too, who was running against the school board or the principal for that school in Florida, and lost the race, but was trying to use the same sort of sexual allegations against that guy that ended up getting used against Matt Gaetz, and he was similarly someone from Florida and similarly wanted to be in a position in, I think he was running for the House. But anyway, point being that this guy seems to be behind a couple of cases, but this is not an unfamiliar playbook, and it's one that has been used against a number of people who have run for elected office, and now I'm looking totally different. There we go. Now it's still kind of blurry. I'll have to fix that later. Anyway, now it looks different. Anyway, so as you can kind of gather from everything that's being talked about there, this is way too, like, not to mention the fact that, this is way too shady. Plus, there's also the fact that it was Biden's own DOJ who, of course, they mentioned in the clip. There's no way in hell that if they saw an opportunity to take down Matt Gaetz in any way, they wouldn't have taken it. Like, if they hadn't seen, like, oh, yeah, he did do this and this, yeah, let's go get him, they would have jumped at the chance immediately to do that for Matt Gaetz, because they're just as establishment as, anybody else in government. They would die for that chance. But that's, unfortunately, one way or another, we'll never know. Unless they release the House Ethics Committee report, which honestly I would rather they don't, because as we see about ethics, when it comes to ethics, there's been the recent hearings in the Senate for the code of ethics that they were trying to force the Supreme Court to enforce upon themselves, and so it was unfortunately it passed because, of course, the left still controls the Senate for now, not much longer, luckily, but for now, and they're passing the this resolution for the court to impose a code of ethics on to members of the Supreme Court. Well, it ended with them. Yeah, they sent this code of ethics, and it was pretty much the ethics that they have abided by since they have been, since the inception of the Supreme Court, and they received them, and they're like, no, this isn't enough. This is. It's like, what? You wanted us to write down a code of ethics and enforce it. We've just written down a code of ethics. Well, this isn't enough. We need more, because they were specifically trying to go after Clarence Thomas and who was it? Who was the other one? Was it Gorsuch, or was it? No, it was. It was somebody else. I can't remember who the second. It's mostly always after Clarence Thomas, because Clarence Thomas is always the one they're after, because Clarence Thomas is a black guy who is conservative, and that's worse than, a white conservative. It's worse than anybody else. So there's no one that the left hates more than a black conservative. So, that was that. It's always after Clarence Thomas. But they just, because that wasn't enough, and it was just trying to find this way to. Oh yeah, there it was. Who was it that? Roberts, Justice Roberts, the what do you call it when you're the head of the Supreme Court? I can't remember the title for the head of the Supreme Court, but anyway, he's the because they refer to it as the Roberts Supreme Court, because they always have the leader's name as the representative for the era that the Supreme Court and the makeup of the Supreme Court. But anyway, the whole thing was meant because he'd gotten some kind of gift of some kind of vacation that was in, I think, the Caribbean or something, where they were on like a cruise of some kind, and that was just terrible, because they had been gifted this by someone. I don't even think that person had a case pending or had any kind of vested interest in any kind of legislation. They just were giving him these tickets. They were friends of his, and they just gave him these tickets for this cruise, and God forbid they take those. So same thing with the RV that Clarence Thomas bought from a friend or sold to a friend. I can't remember even about the specifics, but it was just all nonsense, and it was just some way to try and smear two conservative members of the court, and that was what the whole thing was about. It was about nothing else other than that. And so, but those are older individuals who are on the Supreme Court, and there's not as much leverage they can use and not look really bad if they start going after things like sex scandals and stuff, unless they had some really, really hard evidence in those cases. But against people in the House or the Senate, that's a little bit easier for them because they control at least their own portion of each. And so anyway, it's such a common thing. But if we go back to the Brett Kavenaugh confirmation and Christine Blasey Ford, who had no credible allegations at all, and people were just jumping on the bandwagon to condemn Brett Kavenaugh and do it at his confirmation hearing with his family present, and he's sitting there like in tears because they're literally attempting to ruin his life in front of everyone. And luckily he did get confirmed because he's, without a doubt, he's a pretty stand-up, exemplary sort of example of someone on the Supreme Court. And it's just like, that's the kind of guy you go after and smear because, of course you do, because you hate him and he's got a different ideology than you subscribe to, so we got to destroy him. And it was more about the fact that Trump nominated him, I think, than anything else. But even so, they're dying to. That's why this election was, in particular, something they were fighting so hard for, and they're still, still having such a completely unhinged meltdown on just every news station about it because they're worried that they're going to lose a Supreme Court pick, or they're going to lose, some things that are going to be coming up that potentially could really shift balance in a way that it'll be harder for them to get it back to a place where they think it's going to be just dominated by left-wing candidates for the rest of time. And that's really the most disgusting part of the whole thing, is that this isn't just about the here or the now. This is about for every election from now until the end of the entire United States as a country, is that this is about trying to ensure that they never lose complete control over these levers of power that they have ever again. That's the really insidious part, because fuck the voters, who cares what they think? We know it's best. And it's so incredibly anti-American. And the fact that people would actually, like, I don't know if they actually know this, or if they're in denial, or if they are somehow benefiting from it. But you see dumbasses that go out and especially when it comes to like people who do social media type, like Twitch streamers, YouTube streamers, that actually try to justify this kind of ridiculous shit. It's like what are you getting out of this, and how are you able to justify it? Because I'm hearing nothing that when you hear them debate, you'll hear the same thing over and over again. There's never any deviation. It's always the same arguments, the debunked points, the same ridiculous straw man arguments. It's like there's never anything new. And we've already talked about all this stuff, and yet they just won't concede. I don't know why, but and like I said, I don't know what they're getting out of it other than some sort of short-term just gratification of someone they don't like getting shafted or losing or whatever it is. I don't know. But anyway, that brings us to Pete Hegseth, who, so as was hinted at in that clip, I would also agree that the allegations against Pete Hegseth are most certainly more damning, despite the fact that in their own way, there's not really much there, and he didn't really do anything illegal. It's just very immoral, to say the least. But once again, we have some very, very shaky allegations. We have, in this case, it's all surrounding the fact that, like, so Pete is actually a United States veteran involved in combat in Iraq and I can't remember if it was also Afghanistan or just Iraq, but anyway, as we heard from Dan Bongino in the opening clip, there's he legitimately was a pretty exemplary member of the armed services, and so God knows if it's something related to his maybe PTSD or something that was a result of his time with the military or whatever. But ultimately, there was he had one marriage that fell apart, and because he had cheated on his first wife, and they didn't have any children, but they split up, and then his second wife, it did end up having children with her, but this was at the time when he was at Fox, and there was an executive producer of, I think it was Fox and Friends, who he started having an affair with her, and this time, even though he did have kids, he did end up getting her pregnant, and then his wife at the time found out about the affair, and they split up and filed for divorce, and then he had his other child with his third wife, and now after he's been with his third wife for X amount of time, there's been recent allegations of another affair that's more recent. So I don't know what the deal is. I don't know if he's got issues with loyalty or what exactly it is, but those are essentially the main talking points there. And yet, once again, it's not that it's illegal, but I would say most definitely that much infidelity would most certainly be a lot more of a moral issue for somebody looking to be nominated in an administration than some strange allegations of. But once again, none of these things are that's just the side of the story that we've heard from the ex-wives and from pieces of court documents, I think, that people have obtained. But one person who has been extremely vocal in supporting Pete Hegseth is Megyn Kelly, who, as I've said before, I agree with a lot of Megyn Kelly's stuff, and a lot of stuff I don't agree with her on, but she is the kind of person who digs into the research, and maybe it's because she's a female reporter, and female reporters tend to be into the more gossipy kinds of stories where there's a lot of he said, she said, but she definitely has done a lot of digging into this subject, and she was discussing the nomination and the primary reasons why she thinks this whole thing is ridiculous, with Victor Davis Hanson, who, of course, is one of the most respected intellectual members of the, he's I can't remember what his title is. He does some type of instructing at Stanford, and he's also somebody who's undertaken a lot of grants and done a ton of research for Stanford as well. And he's just a very well-respected intellectual and strong voice for conservatives in those circles, which is getting very, very rare these days. So it's always interesting to hear what he has to say about the subject. So this is a much shorter clip. It's only about 7 minutes, but I'm going to play this one, and then we'll talk about this one at the on the other side, and then we'll probably wrap up. But this was just to once again, because with every nomination, there's not the same level of extreme tension, but the ones that have any kind of something they can really sink their teeth into and latch onto and not let go, they're gonna do that. and especially when it comes to positions involving authorities and some type of force. Like in this case, we're talking about the DOJ, the Department of Justice, and we're talking about a position that is at the head of the military. So in both these positions, it's strongly about use of force, and we've seen what they're willing to do on the Democratic side when they control these things, and it hasn't been good. It's been very, very bad. In fact, it's been scary at times. So as far as these particular departments, I want to make sure more than anything that they get somebody who is not going to be bought off, not going to be disloyal, and not going to be somebody who you can't trust. That ends up, and obviously, Trump remembers his first term very well, and that's why with his picks this time around, they say a whole hell of a lot about what his mindset is like now compared to 4 years ago. So yeah, we'll go ahead and pull this up. This one's right here, and to be honest, I haven't seen this. I've only seen about half of this, so I haven't watched the full clip yet. So I'll be kind of introduced to this as well. But I liked the first half so much, I was like, screw it, we'll check this out. So let me pull this up, and then we'll talk about it on the other end. So, okay, and here we go.
She also tells the police that right at the beginning of the night, when she is first at the bar, Knuckles, which they were at midnight, that this is where things got fuzzy. That's according to her. She started to get fuzzy as of midnight at the bar. But 2 eyewitnesses at the bar say she was fine. The front desk clerk who confronted her an hour and a half later says she was fine. And the 2 videotapes show her smiling, holding Pete's arm, and absolutely fine. After
I should have mentioned this at first. Hold on. I forgot to make mention of this. So there is one aspect of this I forgot to mention. And that is that the woman he had an affair with, supposedly after the his most recent marriage, it was just a one-time encounter. It was at a sort of party that was going on. I think it was related to Fox or something, and people that were there were all. This was late into the night at this point, and Pete had been with this girl for a while, and I don't know if she told him that she was married, or if he knew that she was married, or anything like that, because she also had a husband. And now at this point, they were both drinking heavily. They were at a bar, and as they were going back up to his room, there's several reports that they looked like they were flirting with each other. They were just, having a good time together all night. And then they took off and went to his room, and then she wasn't seen again until the next morning, and she was seen leaving his room. Now her story is that she was drugged by him and was forced into his room. And when she tried to leave, he attempted to block her from leaving and took her phone from her, because the main theory and takeaway from this is that her husband found out about this, and that was her story to him about why this whole thing happened. And this was it was like a rape allegation, or date rape allegation. Now, this is complete bullshit when you hear all the details about it, but I completely forgot that's the whole main reason they're even involving the courts in or something beyond just the confirmation hearing aspect of it. Bringing up this concept of it being illegal in any way is that there's the allegation that she was drugged and then forced with beyond her will to spend the night with him, and he raped her that night because she was so drunk, and yada yada yada. It's all just the same kind of garbage that we saw from during the Me Too movement, when all these people came out and say, "Oh, I was raped too. I was drunk and I didn't want to have sex with that guy." Well, you did, but I regret it. That's not rape. It's the same kind of bullshit like that. But I forgot. I can't believe I forgot to bring that part up. But yeah, so that's what she's talking about there. So let's get back to it now.
Or she says she started getting fuzzy, putting the lie to the claim.
Yeah, but there's no evidence. I mean, when she says she thinks it's possible, sort of, kind of, maybe, that somebody put something in their drink, who is she suggesting that did that? I mean, if Pete is already drunk, I'm not sure he would be able to do that. And she has no evidence that she saw. Who was close to her? Is she saying the bartender did? Why would the bartender do it? Or why?
Well, here's
there
the
was
other
no?
thing. Here's the other thing. Pete, according to this other woman and Pete was, he had an eye out for a woman that night, and it was another woman. It was a different woman who Pete was putting his hand on this woman's knee, while Jane Doe was putting her hand on Pete and trying to flirt with Pete. Pete later told cops he didn't even notice this woman, Jane Doe. She wasn't even a thought in his mind. He had his eye on another woman who wasn't into him. And since Jane Doe was his handler, this other woman called Jane Doe and asked her to be, pardon the term, a crotch blocker. That's in the police report, because she didn't want to be with Pete. So this woman, according to Pete, then goes back to his hotel room with him, stays, this is Pete's testimonial, stays in the room an oddly weird time, like, okay, it's kind of over, goodbye. And she's lingering, and the next thing you know, one thing leads to another. But it sounds like a woman who didn't get any attention from him, who had been pointing out via text to her husband earlier in the night that all the women were going crazy for Pete, and who lingered, who wasn't noticed by the hot guy from Fox, and suddenly found herself alone in his hotel room, lingered, and before you know it, now she's allegedly fuzzy, and the next morning, or two days later, it's coming back to me that I was raped by him.
Yep.
And then she took, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, then she discussed with Pete, or took a payment from Pete to not disclose the incident because he thought it might harm.
Yeah,
3 years
3 years later,
and then
they talk about, I can't remember. I feel like it's possible he heard she was getting ready to go public. I can't remember what the catalyst was. I'll look it up. But in any event, his lawyer and she or her lawyer started to negotiate something to make her be quiet about this, because he realized, his lawyer says, he would be fired in an instant at Fox News if he were accused of rape. So he paid her something to make her go away.
And then how did it air? Somebody directed people to the police report? Was that her? Has she commented? Did she violate her non-disclosure agreement?
Yes. She had a friend write a report and go to Mar-a-Lago, or send the report to Mar-a-Lago to the Trump transition team, and simultaneously, apparently, release it to the media.
Well, I mean, as I understand at the time, I read the police report, but it seemed to me that he was in a process of separating from his wife, so he was nominally single, and she's in the same area with her husband and her 2 kids. And any sane woman knows that if you're married and your husband's in the hotel room, you don't walk with a celebrity who's intoxicated to his room. Yeah. And then if something happens, you immediately, if it's a violent assault, you immediately tell somebody, your husband. Obviously you would go back to your husband and say, my God, I've been raped. Or my friend, you'd call it, but you don't keep mum for almost 3 or 4 days. And then when this process works out, then you don't take money from somebody with the threats that you're going to disclose something that's he said, she said, that would be embarrassing to them. And then you sit on that for years until he becomes, and you get the impression that she would have never come forward because it would have had very little currency unless he's in the limelight now as a nominee for the defense post. So then she wants to come back again. It's very similar to the Kavenaugh debacle. Yeah. Very similar. And I don't think it's going to work, though. I really do. There's so many. We're beyond Me Too now, I think, that people are more rational. And
Like I just said, I didn't even hear this part, but
I
like
think
said, it's just like
I
me
just don't
too.
think the facts will warrant, and once they start to discuss it, it won't warrant a charge that he forcibly put himself on some woman. It just doesn't make sense.
This is an outrageous dereliction of journalistic duty by these news outlets to
Yes.
report it the way that they are.
Yes.
This thing smells to high heaven. The difference between Christine Blasey Ford and this woman, in my opinion, is I think Christine Blasey Ford just made it up to get Kavanaugh because she was a political operative.
I do too.
Maybe she had a negative experience with him all those years ago that didn't involve rape, but that maybe he rejected her. I don't know why she had it in for Kavanaugh, but I know she didn't like his politics. But this woman appears to have just cheated on her husband and then really regretted it and gone into a panic. Under Pete's version of the story, she came back willingly. She threw herself at him. They had consensual sex. And then she said, oh my God, what am I going to tell my husband? And he said, I promise I won't tell. And she said, I'm going to tell him I fell asleep. And at that point, she must have been looking at her phone. We've seen the phone receipts that he had called her. First, he said at 2. Geez, I don't remember the last time we were out till 2 a.m. Then he called her at, again, I'm trying to remember the exact times, but I think it was 2:40 and 2:56 and 3:40. And then, and he also said, I'm going down to Knuckles Bar to look for, like he also went down to Knuckles Bar to look for her. So she must have been in an oh shit moment when she saw all of that on her phone. So she goes back home. She gets in and she's apologetic. The husband is awake because he had just tried to call her at 3:40. And she says she fell asleep. That's it. It doesn't turn into a rape in her head, she says, until Monday morning when she has sex with the husband. And she doesn't give the husband that story until Wednesday. And I guarantee you, these two were having some very heated arguments over the course of those 3.5 days. Where were you? Whose room were you asleep in? Put that person on the phone. Who can I talk to? What, there's just no way a husband doesn't know. I just feel like this husband, he knew something was up, and there's no way that by Wednesday he must have had her, and she resorted to, I was raped. That's all my opinion. But at a minimum, the independent facts should be reported by the news, and they should stop smearing him as though this is an actual rape to which he's admitted, which is what you would think if you read the reports. For those of us holding our breath for the past...
So that paints a pretty good picture of exactly what I'm talking about there, of this being just, and we're talking about the cabinet nominees for Donald Trump, and, every since the first batch came out, everyone's been like, man, wow, these are really strong picks. This is much better than the first time around. And so it can't be overstated that, this is most definitely a byproduct of the Democrats' continued freak out over a second Trump term. Because they know just as well as he does that he damn sure is not going to be making the same mistakes he made the first time. He's going to be picking people who he knows he can trust and that he knows are behind the America First agenda and not going to be, and in this case, you can tell by this pick. And even with Pam Bondi, who replaced Matt Gaetz now for DOJ, this is somebody who has been in court for him time and time again. It's somebody who considers herself a friend of his, like I said before. It's not somebody that's just going to roll over for some Democrat, carrot on a string that is going to be appealing to that person. These are people that are going to go to bat for him seriously, and the only thing that they assume is probably going to work is using the other tactic, which is if you're not going to be bought off, we're going to make you leave by what we make you go through. And this is just the nomination process. Geez Louise, what are we going to see once we get to the point of... Now, luckily, as we've seen finally play out, and finally with that freaking dude in Pennsylvania who was just not conceding the race for was it House or was it Senate? I think it was House. I can't remember. Either way, he just would not concede the race, and he yesterday finally conceded the race. And so we are going to at least have a majority in both both sides of the Congress, and at least in that case, it's going to be a little bit more fair. But the problem is not really necessarily the Democrats in this situation. It's Mitch McConnell loyalists and people that are more establishment Republicans. But luckily, I think that the people like James Comer, Jim Jordan, Eli Crane, some of the stronger people in the House, and then in the Senate side, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Tom Cotton, the people like that, they're going to be Mike Lee, they're going to be much louder voices this time around after they've seen the corruption, they've seen the administration that ran amok with the Biden administration, and they know what they're capable of. So hopefully there's going to be some much more extreme and voluntary voices that come forward that are going to not just roll over and play dead as soon as the Democrats start playing their games and trying to take out Trump's nominees this time. And there's also too many of them, and there's, like I said, they're too diverse from a real diversity perspective this time around, like a Tulsi Gabbard and a RFK Jr., that are going to be completely different for the ways that you're going to want to try and smear them or go after them than people like Matt Gaetz or people like, some of the other picks he's had before that were Republicans, and some of them being Republicans that are more establishment, old school, neocon Republicans that are going to just be super willing and ready to go to war and have no problem with the Ukraine situation and all that. Just about everybody in the cabinet is against the war in Ukraine. They're against continuing to send munitions to Ukraine. They don't freak out that you're talking to Putin like that's a terrible thing, that you're trying to negotiate an end to the conflict by talking to Putin, because I don't know, you might want to talk to the freaking guy that is literally winning the war in that region. So anyway, so hopefully, once we get to the point of the nominations being confirmed, this stuff has more or less been exposed for the sham that it is. But it's going to take, things like people like, Glen Greenwald and Megyn Kelly and dare I say myself, whoever it is that is out there spreading the word about the allegations against these people, that don't just look at the allegations, look at the facts behind what's going on here, look at these people and make sure you know the truth about because allegations are just allegations. And that was what got Sunny Hostin in hot water the other day when she was forced to read that legal statement that got passed on air, because Matt Gaetz' attorney's like, no, we're not going to let you say this on air on your goddamn liberal show that attracts all these radical lunatics on your side. They don't care about the truth behind the situation. They just want you to hear you slam Matt Gaetz. And she was forced to read that statement on air. And you could tell the whole time she looked like she was more pissed off than she's ever looked in any time in history on that show. So they're not playing games either. And it's definitely apparent this time around that everything is far more serious, and they're well aware of what's going to happen, and they're not going to just take it lying down. So that's a good sign. Despite all the negativity, that's a good sign that we're seeing things moving in the right direction, and hopefully we keep seeing that. So just making everybody aware of what's actually going on. That's the important thing. So anyway, that'll do it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. It's been a hell of a week, and sorry for the 2 days I was very late, but starting next week, like I said, we're going to start and switch over to noon to 1 on Pacific time. That'll be 3 to 4 on the East Coast. And so yeah, hopefully we'll be on time a little bit more often with that schedule. So thanks again for watching, everybody. I'll see you on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you on the other side. Peace.
Now, I can't read it. There's no words on it.
Okay. Sure.
There's no words there.